getting clients like a Force India, Sam Miller, L'Oreal, Garnier, Cadbury's, if I'm not wrong. How did that happen? Like, is it because you were one of the first early movers into the space, or is there a kind of secret to winning such amazing clients in the first few years?
So it's an interesting point, and I don't think the same things apply today.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the fact that we were early entrants into the market was one very big factor. Our age was another big factor because we were young. So people were like, "This is a young medium. You want to listen to young people." So I want to listen to somebody who lives within the medium. That was the inherent kind of trust that kind of came with the age. I don't know if that's the same thing that may apply today because we're in a slightly more mature stage of the market today. So I think the fact that I was 20, I took that to my advantage and I used that well. Also firstly for a 20-year-old to knock with a brand manager for a meeting who's about 29, 30, then he's like, okay, this guy's interesting, let me at least give him an audience. And then when he comes into the room and he speaks a little sense with you, he's saying that, okay, this is what the numbers, this is how many people are there, this is how international brands are using it, this is what I can do for your brand, this is what the journey will be 5 years down. So he's like, okay, hey, this is a good find that I found, I can pitch it to my boss and I can put something interesting on the table myself. Yeah. So that was the psychology at that time, and now it's a little more different because now it's big stakes, big budget, and I think if you're in any new domain which you see getting bigger, then that's the way to do it at 20. But that's how I was trying to do it. And then of course when you start doing that and you fail, you'll go to customers and then you'll be like, okay, I've pitched to you also. Maybe everybody won't say, I'm going to give you the business, but some people will say, I'm not going to give you the business, but I'm going to give you a reference. So that's how the first reference of L'Oreal happened.
So what do you really know now that you didn't know at 20 that really helped you to start?
I think good that I didn't know finance. Good that I didn't know that, honestly, because then when you try to do the business plan and project and you crunch and you say that, okay, actually by this month we got to be here. And I remember we were talking yesterday and you said something very interesting is that with age I've become a little more content or more safe. So I think I would say that safe point is not linked to the finance, but the fact that you don't have to crunch the numbers necessarily, you don't have to constantly look at them, the fact that you're not trying to you're not trying to build a company for balance sheet, but you're trying to build a company for the fun of it. So I didn't understand that concept of the P&L and the balance sheet, to be honest, for 5-6 years. I was just having fun. And I think if that was not the case, then I would have not been able to do it. And honestly, also, it was like, one of the things one must also acknowledge, and I think there might be professionals, and that's why I think they say that founders who form a company at 35, 36, they are much more sure of success. So, and I'll come back to that point, because when you say a founder coming at 19, 20, his opportunity cost is very low. So my opportunity cost was 15,000 rupees a month. And so my opportunity cost being 15,000 rupees a month allowed me to take the plunge very easily. Now, when somebody's doing this at 35, the opportunity cost is between 4.5-5 lakh rupees a month.
Absolutely.
Let's say, give or take, minimum.
Yeah.
Or whatever, between 2 and 5 lakh rupees a month. But your home is running on that salary.
Yeah.
And therefore, then when the founder takes the plunge at 35, 36, they are dead sure, mentally very, very sure about what they are doing.
What is something that you know now, you wish you knew it when you were 20?
So what I know now is that I think when I was 20, I had a very myopic view of marketing. So what I know now is that marketing is a form of investment like any investment. And any investment is supposed to deliver a return and supposed to accelerate growth. If an investment in marketing is leading to an acceleration in sales, which is ultimately the role of marketing, which is that you have the right consumer insight, and then you've got the right kind of messaging which really hits home with consumers, and then you roll the dice, and then you're seeing the growth, which is like any investment in anything, So I think from that standpoint, I learned that relatively older. I didn't know that at 20, saying that, because at 20 you're like, hey, marketing is about getting featured in the ad journals, and marketing is about winning awards, and marketing is about, how cool can I make that slogan? But fundamentally what marketing is doing, and the reason large companies are investing in marketing, is because they're saying that, okay, there's these large catchment of consumers who I can cater to, and if my message hits home with them, I can accelerate the growth in a very simple way. And therefore companies who have got to be useful in the marketing domain for large clients have got to be the ones who can really identify what the consumer catchments are, research what really hits their heart with respect to the product need, and then put that message out in the best possible way. So if I knew that, I think I would have built a business like I'm building right now at 21, 22 also. I mean, it's fun. Building that kind of business is fun. So I would have kind of maybe pivoted my business to a more integrated business much faster.
Harshil, everyone who is trying to kind of set up an agency secretly or even openly have this dream that one day I'll have a successful exit, or at least someone will show interest in acquiring me. The other thing is that for people who are kind of interested to know, what can founders do really to set themselves up for an kind of acquisition or a takeover?
Got it. So I'll take your second answer first, which is that, if you want to get acquired, I don't think you should be chasing it. Because I think you can't build a business to sell. I think in my mindset, where I'm at right now, I'm not building a business to sell. I'm building a business because I think that where I'm at right now is that there are large agency groups that we compete with in the Indian marketplace. All those large agency groups are either owned by the Japanese, Americans, British, or the French. And we think that there's a space for an Indian-grown agency network to participate in global markets. So that's what I'm trying to build out from here. And I think I'm not interested in getting acquired, to be honest. How do you set up for acquisition is, I think the focus is, if you are to really set up an agency and get acquired, then it's about, one is the profitability the longevity of the profitability that you can sustain, which is that if you can maintain a margin between 30 to 40% per annum consistently for 3 to 5 year period, then you become a right target for acquisition. Second is that most acquirers are looking now for acquisitions which have a profit after tax of about 10 crore odd per annum.
Okay.
So if you are in that range where you are able to sustain a 10 crore odd profit after tax per annum on a consistent basis for 3 years, then you become a good right target for acquisition. If one of the big reasons to get acquired is that if the group that is acquiring you attracts you a lot in terms of that, hey, I'm going to join with these people and they're going to be like-minded. I think with any services business, it's about the group of people that you work with. So you and Suharsh, you all get along pretty well, and that's why you all work together. And similarly with a larger acquisition also, I think for a founder, it's the same kind of mindset that while I'm liquidating my company, I'm going to work with these people, and these people over the next 3, 5, 10 years. I mean, of course, most of the contracts have a between 3 to 5 year exit clause where the earnout is over 3 to 5 years. So if that is what is interesting to you, then I think that's where, so you got to maintain your PAT at a certain level or a threshold, and then you got to see that, hey, these guys are there, I want to work with them, and that's what it is.
What are some of the positives and some negatives of starting with friends?
So starting with friends, one of the positives is that you can have fun. You can have a lot of fun. I think that's what you said. So the late nights don't seem that late, and you have to you can really work through. You kind of have this innate sense of understanding for each other. Your most of the time your families also know each other, so they're all like rooting behind you. You have other common friends who are rooting behind you. So these are all common things, but I think, starting with friends, that's the big advantage, from that perspective. And the negative is that once you have to, maybe if you have to exit the partnership, things can get a little sour. Because then there's like, oh, this guy is not with me anymore. This guy doesn't want to be with me anymore. So, I think the emotional advantages and disadvantages of starting with friends. And depending on where you are in your journey, it's important to navigate that correctly.
Because I have realized, and it's absolutely personal narrative, that when you're starting, I think एक और एक 11 हो जाते हैं और अकेला आदमी आधा हो जाता है. Right? I'm saying generally the fact that, but what I don't know is that when does it start becoming a crowd, right? So that's the thing. With just one co-founder, I still think that it's easier to balance, but with a lot more than that, that's one of the things that I'm not very sure of. What is the magic?
My philosophy on this is that for service-led companies, and I have only the service-led experience, so I can only talk about that. On this, this philosophy is that while you can have founders and co-founders at different varying junctures, you need to decide who's the captain of the ship.
Yeah.
So I think that's very, very critical. And it's so once you decide who's the captain of the ship and then you structure the business together, then I think it all kind of falls into place, because the captain has the ability to then take certain calls and say that, okay, this is crowded, this is not crowded. Hey, this is the kind of stake we'll give to this one, this is not. So I run a business with a total of 3 partners right now, 3 of us at Shebang. We are at different junctures, but I'm the captain of the ship. So it's everyone's roles are very clearly defined, and as long as people are bringing what they need to bring to the table on an ongoing basis, I don't think it becomes a crowd. It is very, very service sector specific,
Very service sector specific, and also I think easier said than done, because when you're in mid-20s and the money starts flowing in and the glamour starts coming in, right? For example, your articles getting published everywhere, 30 under 30 is happening, all of that. So people who are doing work behind the scenes actually sometimes feel that I am missing out. I am not getting the kind of coverage I need to get, and that's when the whole ego clashes start. A lot of things happen, right?
Yeah.
So
and that's why also the captain has to play a big role. You need a captain who has the ability to give credit to the teams where it's due.
Absolutely. So
and that is a hallmark of a good leader also, because that is what it is. But coming back to your previous point you said about acquisition, I think the other thing I just want to add is that I think today the acquisition model is changing a little bit. I don't think the large companies will acquire 100%. I think that if you see the new model which S4 Capital has deployed, which is Martin Sorrell's new entity after WPP. What he's talking about, he's not talking about acquisition, he's talking about partnership. So he's talking about them taking a 50% stake and keeping 50%. So that's where they're at.
And after Foxy Moron and running it successfully and getting such amazing clients, why did you think of starting Shebang? Right? What was the motivation there, personal, professional?
So my story was a little bit like this, where coming to this whole bit of the partnership, I was not finding balance in the partnership. So I felt like there was, kind of like a little bit of what you spoke about. In the mid-20s, you're getting written about a lot. The priorities of people were not kind of aligned. So I had this deep sense in me saying that, okay, this has kind of run its course in that sense. It's not working correctly for me in terms of the balance of the partnership. I don't think people are bringing equal to the table, and I don't think our principles and priorities are aligned. And I wasn't seeing that playing out for the long haul. So that's when I decided at 26, I decided that I'll take a step back and I will exit the business. And that's what I did. And then I set up Shebang. And with Shebang, it was the reason we call it Shebang is because we call it, there's 2 purposes to it. One is the whole shebang, saying that we can deliver to customers the whole shebang if they need to get integrated pieces together. So right from the online, offline, hiring a celebrity, doing the research, and deploying the media and doing the production and all of that. So everything under one roof. So we've got about 500 people who do that at this point in time, and growing. And the other thing is also the idea of Shebang also means completeness. So wherever the customers have chinks in their business, we can come and deploy the completeness. So we have this other part to the business which is about business transformation. So where we are doing ERP deployments, CRM deployments, we're also doing intranets. So communication-based intranets, because communication is so important inside the company also. Large CEOs need the ability to do that, communicate effectively with their staff. So how do you build technology which, or how do you deploy existing technology stacks which allow companies to, kind of be aligned with the communication through top to bottom. So that part of completeness is what we are delivering, and that's where we've built that business out. And there was also this burning desire, saying this India to the world desire is, something that I wake up with on most days, saying that there's this India to the world agency. I mean, I think the word agencies, slowly, I think a lot of agencies will move out of the word agency, because we are not typically agents in that sense anymore.
Yeah.
So that word will get redefined, but this services business, which is a services company around marketing and technology, bringing the worlds of marketing and technology together, I think that is something that, and having a global company on that is something that's a missing piece at this point in time.
And when you are looking at a kind of journey of an organization, there are a lot of external validations, right? For example, in your case, LinkedIn identifying it as one of the top startups, or many more, right? Number of people working for you. What are some of the internal metrics? When you look at it, it gives you a sense that we are in the right space. हम अच्छा कर रहे हैं. Something that's reassuring.
So in a services business, I think some of the metrics that you look at internally, and I'll take the second question first. Some of the metrics that you look at in a services business are, first and foremost, you look at attrition, because if more and more people want to stay in the company for longer periods of time, then that means you're doing something right. And I don't think we're doing fully right there. So I think we have some work to do there, and it's a constant process. So that's one. So first is attrition. Second is profit after tax is the other thing that you look at, because you also, I mean, I know that it's not just a money business, but the fact that the money is an indication that your machinery is well oiled.
Yeah.
So I think more than that is that. The third is the kind of validation that you speak about in the outside world is also an intrinsic factor, because when the world is appreciating what you're doing in terms of your work being awarded or your work being benchmarked, then that is something that is strong framework for the outside world, because it indicates that your staff is very tuned to that. The other things that you kind of check is also the quality of discussion that is happening across the board in your different teams. So as you're managing, in my case right now about 500 people, I have to constantly be checking that is the quality of discussion, is the quality of conversation actually good, because what I eventually want to be able to do is have, really strong grey-haired people who are running across the board within this ship. They've chosen to be associated with this ship because they see that, hey, this is a culture that I identify with. The other thing that they talk about is the companies of tomorrow being like cults. So is it a cult that I want to be a part of? Is it a cult that, that I resonate with? Are there some practices that they follow? Are there some, some beliefs that they have which I follow? Because then I feel like I'm a part of them. And that's the hallmark of strong companies, I think. And particularly in a people-run business, that's a very strong hallmark. So I think that, if I had to really do a self-assessment, then I'm not fully there yet. I'm always working towards building that. And it's a tiring procedure. As an entrepreneur, it's a tiring procedure to constantly keep building on that. But I know that these are the fundamentals of my business.
Yeah.
With respect to doing work outside, I have evaluated a lot of opportunities outside.
And how do you manage team building and curating and nurturing the culture of a place like this? Because so many people across different locations, also extremely demanding clients, and so how do you really manage kind of building culture, team building, and building the culture of the place?
So interestingly, I think that human resources in services business are one of the most underinvested areas.
Yeah.
And I think that is the area where we try to invest a little more than the others. So how you do with culture is like, we have just signed on with Airmeet recently.
Wow.
Not as a client, but we've taken the subscription for Airmeet, so all the town halls are happening on Airmeet, and this whole stage and this backstage bit is cool. The rooms and everything. I think they built a fantastic product, very, very, very good product. So you do more and more communication with the teams. I think that's the first bit. I think the other thing is that what we've also done over the last 3 or 4 years is we've really solidified the induction process. So we have like 6 videos, 3 days of induction, 6 videos that you got to watch that immerse yourself in the culture. We have a mix of physical and digital. So like digital is you got all these induction videos, you've got tons of presentations, which is talking about know your department, talking about know the organization, talking about know the past work of the organization, talking about, okay, this is what we stand for. Then we've got 9 principles that we run the business by. So we take everybody through those 9 principles. So, as you got a mix of those things, and you got this India purpose, and you got strong values, and you're running with honesty, and you're running with transparency. The other thing that we also do, and I think a lot of other companies do it, but we do it where each of our teams have very clear-cut targets. So, each of the teams has a clear-cut target in terms of how they work towards meeting those targets, and there's transparent reviews of that every month. So we're now moving everything into a cloud-based system where any manager can come in and see, okay, my target is this, here's where I'm at, and this is how much I've got to go. So that performance-oriented culture keeps going, and then there's also this caring-oriented culture, and it's a mix of it, I think.
How did you get into meditation, and what has been that journey like?
Yeah, so I would also highly recommend it. I think often, and I kind of wrote about it in the song also, in Ujjare I wrote about it, which was "Ja apne andar khoj wo roshni, wo jo roshni tujh mein hai chupi." So I think that is what meditation allows you to tap into. It taps, at the end of it, it's your mind a little away from everything else, and it just helps you figure out who the hell you are, and helps you stronger to that element of purpose. Like you spoke about, the purpose for brand is purpose for individual also, which I think you can find a lot more deeply with meditation. If you ask me, one of the things that I wish I knew in the 20s was I wish I knew the power of being able to meditate well.
So I'm reading this book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant on happiness and life and money. And Harshil, to you and everyone else here, I think it's one of the most phenomenal books I've read in past, full of wisdom. And if you have time, Harshil, pick that up. And absolute pleasure talking to you. You told me about making this company the global, taking it from India to globe. I don't have any doubt that if anybody could do it, you'll be that one person who will be able to do. So on that note, thank you so much for your time. An absolute pleasure, and very, very insightful for me.